Were you ever afraid of monsters under your bed? Perhaps those lurking in your closet, or maybe even those hiding in the shadow of the trees behind your house. What happened when you grew older and the vision of those monsters faded into the backdrop? Did they vanish? Did they die? Or perhaps, did they transform, metamorphosing into much larger, more incongruent, invisible forms that preyed not just on children, but entire cities, species, ecosystems, and the planet itself? If so, are you still afraid of them today? My name is Olscamp, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm an educator entangled in the worlds of visual art, theater, and climate action here at Pearson United World College. I thank you so much for indulging me in my affinity for the monstrous ecologies and how these concepts have shaped both my pedagogy and the way I navigate and see the world around me. My journey into the world of monstrosity began at a young age, sparked by the fascination with creatures that inhabit our stories and our collective imaginations. I remember watching old horror movies on the weekends with my friends and being fascinated that the creatures I was meant to be repulsed and terrified by did quite the opposite. They drew me inward, and they reminded me of myself, or perhaps just how I saw myself. Whether I was deciphering the mythological monsters of many legends or spending countless hours trying to sketch out the cartoonishly hybrid forms of the villains on the Power Rangers, little did I know that monsters and the concepts of monstrosity would have such a deep effect on me and lead me to reimagining how I approach pedagogy and the conceptualization of climate action. Drawn to the tales of monsters, I was captivated by their ability to both terrify and intrigue. This fascination stayed with me far into adulthood and through my academic journey and led me to the works of scholars like Jeffrey Jerome Cohen and his seminal text, Monster Culture, 7 Theses. Cohen's theses finally offered me a framework for understanding how monstrosity fit into the idea of our cultural narrative. From the outsider to the abject, monsters challenge our perceptions and they push the boundaries of what is deemed acceptable. They are phenomena made real. They are difference and otherness embodied, and they resist the traditional forms of categorization and inquiry. They live at the borders of what is deemed possible, achievable, and desirable. They are both feared and desired. And they never die, instead existing forever as reminders of why we made them. But what do monsters have to do with climate change and storytelling? Strangely for me, everything. Take, for example, the connection between climate change and some of the most infamous monsters of classical Western literature. It was in 1816 that the world experienced an incredible climate phenomenon that would become to be known as the year without summer. It was characterized by abnormally cold temperatures and strange climate phenomenon happening all across the world. This phenomenon was primarily attributed to the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in April 1815, which ejected a massive amount of volcanic ash and gases up into the atmosphere. A monstrous event in its own right. But this gas and the ashes formed a veil around the earth and blocked out the sunlight, leading to global cooling. The effects of the eruption were felt worldwide in crop failures, famine, and even social unrest in various regions. And what better circumstances for a monstrous story or two to unfold? Because it was these unusual weather conditions that in part inspired 2 literary works in that same summer at the same literary retreat, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and The Vampire by John Polidori. Both of which of these stories of monsters grappled with the psychological and societal implications of monsters and the interplay between environmental upheaval and our fears of the unknown. In today's world, this same interplay is still at work, and we are faced with a new breed of monsters born from the realities of climate change. Movies like Godzilla take rise from the fear of nuclear warfare and nature's ability to fight back against the forces that dominate and oppress it. Games and subsequent TV shows like The Last of Us force us to deal with the consequences of our own actions and a new breed of monsters that we have caused to spread across the earth. And it's these stories, these monsters, and why we tell them that are at the heart of what I teach. As an educator, I am committed to teaching not only the science of climate change, but the cultural, ethical, artistic, and personal implications of how the stories we tell shape and reshape how we fear or desire change. It's here that this brought me to develop my own curriculum for the Pearson College Climate Action Leadership Diploma called The Nest, which stands for the entanglement of narrative, ecology, selfhood, and thinking. A curriculum dedicated to critical, creative, conceptual, speculative, and meaningful explorations in the complex entanglements of studying, working, living, and creating in the realm of evolving climate change. Drawing from, honoring, and allying with indigenous storytelling, such as the Inuit traditions of horror, we learn the vital intersections of monstrosity and nature as forces not only to fear, but to respect and honor in our interconnectedness with the world around us. Take, for example, the powerful story of Sedna. Although she is commonly known as the Inuit goddess of the sea or the mother of the sea, she is a powerful mother to all. Sedna resides at the bottom of the ocean, or in some stories in the underworld, and she protects the animals and the sea animals for honoring the availability of them to hunters who honor and respect her power. The story of Sedna varies among Inuit communities across the world, but a common theme involves her transformation from a mortal woman into a powerful immortal deity. In one version of the story, Sedna clings to a boat in turbulent waters, and her own father cuts off her fingers. Her severed fingers fall into the ocean, and they become the sea animals she will protect and mother and care for. In other stories, her long black hair lays in tangles along her face when there is disorder, and it is up to the duty of mortals to swim down and untangle the knots of her hair to restore the order of the seas and what is happening on land. But no matter which story you hear, Sedna's creation is a monstrous one, but one told not out of just fear, but to convey important cultural values and lessons, such as the importance of respecting nature and the consequences of human actions on the environment we inhabit. It's this desire for powerful storytelling which brought me back to one of my favorite scholars, Donna Haraway, who figured into existence three key terms and concepts which have become vital in my navigating and teaching of climate and climate action and the navigating of the world around me. The first term is the Thulucene, an alternative title for the current epoch or span of time we are existing within, otherwise known to many as the Anthropocene. The Thulucene is a new figuring framework for embracing complexity and entanglement. Although similar in pronunciation and poignantly serendipitous on a talk on monsters, the word Thulucene is not a play on the word Thulu, which originates in the works of H.P. Lovecraft and particularly his story, The Call of the Thulu. That is another sea monster dormant deity for another day. Actually, Haraway's concept of Thulucene diverges from Lovecraft's and takes its narrative in part and its name from a much smaller monstrous creature, Pamoa Thulu, a type of spider native to Haraway's home of California, which takes its name from the word chthonic, which comes from the ancient Greek and refers to anything that is in the subterranean or the underworld. Chthonic can refer to anything which relates beneath the earth, including the natural phenomenon, forces of nature, or symbolic representations of Earth's primal power. Haraway uses the word Thulucene to describe an alternative vision of the future and our shared complex present that emphasizes interconnectedness, multi-species collaboration or kinship, and resilience in the face of environmental challenges. In Haraway's framework, this represents a shift away from anthropocentrism, the human-centeredness of it all, and towards a more inclusive understanding of life on Earth, one that acknowledges the agency and importance of non-human agents such as plants, animals, and entire ecosystems, even the most chthonic like spiders, worms, slugs, bacteria, and insects of the like. The second term and key concept that I borrow from Haraway in my teaching is the idea of tentacular thinking, which challenges traditional binaries of thinking and feeling and emphasizes the complexity and multiplicity in the way that we see and understand the world we inhabit. The term draws inspiration, yes, from the idea of tentacles, which are flexible, multifunctional, and capable of reaching out in multiple directions simultaneously. Like many cephalopods with a decentralized nervous system, the binary between feeling and thinking is much slimmer and is more akin to a new word, feel thinking. The ability to garner complex tactile, thermic, spatial, emotional, logical information, all with a single swipe of an appendage. What would it mean for our students to approach the same entanglement of feeling and thinking in similar yet human ways? Lastly is the term sympoiesis, which is a term used to describe the collaborative and co-creative relationships between different entities, both human and non-human, in the making of complex systems or worlds. Unlike autopoiesis, which refers to self-making or self-organizing within a single entity, sympoiesis emphasizes the interdependence and mutual influence among multiple entities in the creation of new forms, structures, or systems. Take, for example, lichen, which is not one organism, but the mutual symbiosis of fungus and cyanobacteria. Or the infection of juvenile Hawaiian bobtail squid by specific Vibrio bacteria as an example of symbiogenetic model system in order to produce light. Or bee orchids, whose evolutionary biomimicry of a particular bee species' own sex organs was used to attract these pollinators, but now serves as a solemn reminder of the extinction of that same bee species it is now out-existed and yet still remains a mirror of. In other words, these radical forms of kinship highlight the idea that systems and ecosystems are not isolated entities, but are instead composed of interconnected and independent parts that co-evolve and co-create with each other, much like an educational community like we have here at Pearson College. Thulucene, tentacular thinking, and sympoiesis are all monstrous words. They challenge traditional forms of individuality, agency, and autonomy by foregrounding the collaborative and relational aspects of existence. They invite us to rethink our relationships with other beings and entities, recognizing the ways in which we are entangled with them, dependent on the larger web of life and their coexistence in order for collective action or change. And so, we have Power Rangers, a volcanic eruption, Frankenstein, Sedna, an octopus, and a spider at the forefront of my teaching. Where does that leave us? Intrigued, repulsed, confused? I hope so. To address the challenges of our climate action and our climate change education, we must look to a monstrous future. We must reimagine the nature of climate pedagogy itself, moving away from singular navigatable disciplinary boundaries, which like single threads have woven singular keystones in our ways of knowing. Additionally, we must not only be drawn to multi- and interdisciplinary approaches, as they so often can become just multiple disciplines existing on top of one another without actually remaining untangled. Instead, we must seek to learn from the monsters we have made before us and what they mean to teach us, to resist systemic or disciplinary boundaries and categorizations and their limitations, like art and science or fact and fiction. We must embrace hybrid and entangled forms of knowing and teaching that mirror the complexity of the world we inhabit. In closing, I want us to embrace monstrosity, not as something to be feared, but as a catalyst for change. an evolution in the way we teach and create to create more complex, entangled, and sustainable approaches to education. By rethinking and reshaping how we see, hear, think, and share the stories of our shared sacred ecologies, we inevitably will metamorphose how we learn and therefore how we teach. We too are the monsters of our own making, and there's nothing to be afraid of. Thank you.